Dis op die kop 12:30 en jy luister na Sant in die Uurglas en die insetsel is leefstyl. Now today we're going to be speaking to Dave Henderson from MYeBook down in Cape Town. Dave, how are you today?
No complaints, no complaints. How's it going outside by you?
It is beautiful weather. The Free State has had rain and yes, it's just a glorious day outside.
Beautiful.
Dave, we're waiting anxiously to hear about the new book that has just been published. It's called Down at Jika Jika Tavern. But before we do that, I have some questions for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have your coffee ready there?
I was actually busy taking a sip as you asked me.
Now, Dave, MYeBook is a company that was formed in 2012. It's not a traditional publishing house, so break that down for us into layman's terms.
Okay, so basically as the author types the last word inside the book, the choice comes up of how you want to get that book out into the world. So there's typically two main trains of thought when it comes to how best to get your book out into the hands of readers. There's a traditional sense, which is I want to go and knock on the door of Penguin, for example. Obviously, each country tends to have a big few publishers that dominate that space. And you knock on that door and you say, hey guys, I'm a new author. I've got a book I think you might like. Would you partner with me? And essentially, at best, what happens is the publisher says, okay, we'll take on your book as a project. We'll foot a lot of the bills when it comes to getting the book looking as good as possible. And then we're going to take some of your royalties. Please sign this contract for us. So that's the traditional method of publishing. And only a fraction of authors are able to get that deal. For a whole bunch of different reasons, basically, your book might not be the preferred genre of the publisher. They might be sort of overwhelmed with submissions. Typically what happens is because it's your first or second book, it's not as polished as it should be. And the publisher looks at it and they don't necessarily say it's not good enough, but what they think is that to get this book to the level it needs to be, it's going to take too much work. And so typically of the fraction who get through to the publisher, a fraction of those authors are actually eventually published. And the timeline that's passed, between sending out the initial hello and getting the actual acceptance is typically sort of a year or 2 years at best. And what you can expect from that process is hopefully a royalty of a book at around sort of 10 or 15%. So whatever you sell a book for in like an exclusive bookstore, to earn 10 to 15% of that. And the alternative, because obviously the traditional method suits certain authors and certain personality types, but for everyone else, we tend to recommend self-publishing, and that's where we step in. So it's shorter timelines. Generally, there's no rejection because we'll help you no matter what. The step would be, but it's now self-funded. So it's a project that you're in control of. You own whatever is created, and each step is then sort of allocated a time and a cost that the author then has to be responsible for.
Dave, times are changing out there. So have you had any inquiries on audiobooks?
So audiobooks are fairly new in a lot of different senses. So they're new in the fact that they're still classed as the up-and-coming market worldwide. So if you had to sort of ask, people in the publishing space, what format's getting them most excited on the horizon, it's audiobooks. Audiobooks have one of the highest uptakes of ebooks, of paperbacks. And true to Amazon, or true to the way publishing works worldwide, authors from South Africa and Africa have typically been on the back foot. So a couple of years back, Amazon obviously went global with Audible. That's generally where most people buy their audiobooks from. But as we've seen before with other sort of publishing-related things like this, authors from South Africa and Africa are not able to get directly into Amazon. And so what we have to do is we typically have to find the best possible way to get our books distributed or audiobooks distributed. And figured out a channel that will accept a South African audiobook. We'll get it into, I think, 42 or 43 different stores, including Audible, meaning that our authors are no longer disadvantaged in the sense of we have the same access as authors from the first world to get audiobooks into the ears of listeners.
Yeah. Dave, what I want to ask you, most of your business in my ebooks is conducted via a mixture of phone calls and emails. How do the authors actually know you guys are trustworthy?
I love that conversation, and the reason I love it is because it's almost a spin-off conversation about how to conduct e-commerce business in South Africa. And now what South Africa is, it's a representation of a market that we're very new to e-commerce. We don't have trust. There's a very high level of fraud. And so the bigger question is how to get people to trust you and your business with as few interactions as possible. And it's a topic that I absolutely love because it boils down to, or for us it boils down to, a mixture of some of my biggest passions, which is content marketing, or making information freely available for people. Because typically once someone stumbles across our free blog posts or our free videos for authors, there's a sense of trust built into those transactions.
Now, Dave, you publish online primarily, so you can deliver an awesome service from anywhere in the world. But you are currently based in Cape Town. So if anyone
That's
wants to contact you, what is your email address there?
So being a digital first business means that the fact that we're based in Cape Town is not, if you're a South African based author or even a global, author living in a different country, the service level won't change. We'll give you the same service we give every author. And the best way, as always, for a digital first company is going to be approaching us through our website, which has sort of the basic information that every author needs to know, including the very obvious contact form to get through to us.
That's wonderful. Dave, before we take a music break, I want to ask you, if I've completed a draft of my manuscript, in what format do you guys prefer it?
So I think the most common format and the easiest format for an author to get their writing into is Microsoft Word. You do sometimes get an author that's more design orientated and they're going to have some fancy Adobe software, I'm sure. But typically most industry professionals will be able to work with Microsoft Word. The important thing to note is that when your finished book is completed, the format is no longer going to be Microsoft Word, but as a starting point, Word is probably the best format.
Dave, you just shocked me. I'm heartbroken. I've got 500 pages I just typed up for you.
Wow. I hope you typed it up in Microsoft Word.
No, it was on a typewriter.
We actually do get authors like that. Surprisingly enough, we get a whole bunch of authors that have come through to us and said, either I've written my book in pen, or they've come to me and said, my book was printed such a long time ago that the publisher's not around, and I only have a physical copy of the book, but I want this whole digital ebook thing. And so there is actually an answer for an author like that, where we can, it's called OCR scanning. And basically where it's a process where we can take physical, like a printed book, or potentially even handwriting, scan it in, but actually recognize each character as we scan it so that it's easier to digitize. And I've actually run that process for a couple of authors where they have these old books from years and years ago.
Oh, thank goodness. I can send mine to you. Well, we're going to take a music break. We're going to listen to Boek van Blerk, and then we'll talk to Dave Henderson about that new book that has just been published. Nearly 2:45, and you're listening to Santini Irglas, and the insert is Lifestyle. Today we're chatting to David Henderson. He's from MYeBooks, and he's all the way live from Cape Town. So Dave, I'm so excited. You guys just published a new book. It's fiction, and it's called Down at Jika Jika Tavern. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, so the author is a very talented lady from KwaZulu-Natal, Ashling McCarthy. And what I love about Ashling and what I love about her book is, as a country, South Africa consumes mostly non-fiction. And so typically the books you see and the books you hear about are the latest political drama or self-help type book. And so the beauty of helping an author with a fiction title is the ability of Amazon to leapfrog, geographical boundaries and get the book in front of, for example, countries like America, where fiction is the main genre that's consumed. So typically an author who wrote fiction felt unappreciated in their own country, for example, South Africa, where the books just weren't being consumed by our local readers. So the beauty of Ash's book is that using Amazon and using the ebook route, we're able to get it in front of in front of these hungry readers.
That is wonderful. Dave, we're a bit on a time limit, so I'm going to ask you to read a little bit of it.
No problem. So what I'll do is I'll start with her blurb. So because this is not non-fiction, the preface or introduction is not the same. And so I'm going to start with the blurb starts down at Jika Jika Tavern. When student anthropologist Nonhle Ngubane returns home to Zululand, she is faced with the unmanageable. Her father, a game ranger, is arrested for rhino poaching, a crime she knows he'd never commit. However, Nonhle is unaware that a dark plot of revenge between a conflicted traditional healer and a slippery rhino poaching boss is unfolding. When the evidence against her father starts to stack up, she takes matters into her own hands, setting in motion a chain of events that finds her fighting not only for her father's innocence, but for her life. So that's the blurb. That's the blurb used to get the readers excited for the book. If there's time, I can read from the beginning of the book.
It's so enticing, Dave. I am going to ask you to read a page or two.
No problem. I'll start reading and you can tell me where to stop. So the beginning chapter is titled A Terrible Mistake, the 29th of November 2012. The driver parked the old business centre in an informal settlement lay-by between the dirt road and the railway lines. The cut of tracks, thin and bright, in the dark fabric of the night. A sudden gust of wind blew through the open windows, but did little to mask the varying odours of unexpressed emotion inside. For within the shoddy interior, two men, a boy on the cusp of manhood, prepared themselves for the dangerous task ahead. The boy, Mandla, watched as the man in the passenger seat pulled out a battered water bottle filled with a muddy brown liquid. A string of tiny red and white beads on a thin white thread hung from the bottle's neck, a talisman of luck. Becky untwisted the cap, sniffed the contents, and recoiled with a grimace. But then, after a deep breath, he pinched his nose between two fingers and let the bitter brew run down his throat. Becky's attempt to pass a bottle to the man in the driver's seat rustled in the rolling of the man's eyes and an adolescent turn of his head. Becky clicked his tongue against his teeth in irritation and handed the bottle to Mandla. Mandla hesitated. He'd never drunk Muti before, but he didn't want to offend the ancestors and create bad luck for himself. He took a tentative sip and then gulped down as much of the liquid as he could manage. And then he waited. After a minute or two, his bottom lip, which tasted like he'd licked the floor of a cattle kraal, protruded in disappointment. "Hawu, Becky," he whined. "I can still see you. Can you see me?" Becky's serious face lit up, and he roared with laughter, smacking the driver's arm with delight, as if Mandla was joking. "That's good, little man, but it's not me you should be worried about. It's the men with the big guns and the dogs that you need to hide from." Mandla felt the blood drain right out of his head, and a whimper escaped his lips. At the sound, the man in the driver's seat finally spoke. "Wena," he scolded Becky. "Don't listen to him, Mandla," Nkosi said, twisting in his seat to glare at Mandla. Mandla sat up immediately. He knew that Nkosi had taken a big risk in bringing him on this excursion. It was his chance to prove himself and perhaps get the opportunity to join Nkosi's team permanently. When Nkosi finally indicated that it was time, the three quickly emerged from the vehicle. They set about covering its dusty body with acacia branches, which had frayed in the boots of his vehicle from Nkosi's village. It was a necessary precaution, as a small copse of trees missing branches near a game reserve might alert a patrolling security company to illegal activity going on. Out of the boot came tatty backpacks and gear, which they shouldered according to their rank and role. They ran up the slope into the dark and began a 30-minute walk along the railway line, headed towards a large marula tree which marked their entry point. When the tree was in sight, Nkosi swore and stopped dead in his tracks. Mandla, who had been trotting to keep up with the two men, bumped into the back of Becky, who had pulled up alongside Nkosi. The majestic marula tree had been chosen as their entry point because it had a large solid limb that stretched over the fence into the reserve. Nkosi had planned for them to scale the tree and drop into the other side from the low-hanging branch. But now, that branch was gone. Only a stub coated in bleeding sap was left of the freshly hacked limb. Mandla felt a wave of worry wash over him, and he immediately reached for his lip, his fingers plucking at the thin skin. Nkosi, who had been staring at the tree, suddenly came to life. He spun Mandla around so that he could access Mandla's backpack. Out came a wire cutter, and in less than a minute an opening was created, allowing all three to leopard crawl through and melt into the grass of the open veld.
Dave, you got us captivated there. And I think everyone who wants to buy this book. Now, if they want to buy this book, where can they get it?
Okay, so easy starting point is the book's title is down at Jika Jika Tavern. The talented author is Ashling McCarthy. And like our previous author, Ashling has her own website. So it's Ashling, it's ASHLINGMCCARTHY.co.za. And likewise, you can also search for the book directly on Amazon as well. It's available in both ebook as well as paperback format.
Well, that's captivating. It's got us intrigued. It's got you wondering what's going to happen next. And, you know, everything is explained so immaculately. So, well, hats off to her. That is well done.
Absolutely.
Dave, thank you so much for chatting to us. You must enjoy the beautiful Cape. And we look forward to speaking to you next Thursday.
Thanks. Excited for our next chat.
100%. Dave, enjoy your afternoon.
Thanks.
We were talking to Dave Henderson, and he was telling us about a new book that has just been published.